Well, welcome to the first Stuff and Things of 2011. Yeah, I've subtitled this Confessions of a Recovered Paytridiot. And there's, maybe I'll throw in the second subtitle because I haven't written the stuff out yet. And that would be, how much time do you have to waste? Like the song from Bonnie Raitt, Afraid to Run Out of Time, when she says, life gets awful precious when there's less of it to waste. Beautiful. I remember also a little placard that was in one of my friends' his kitchen. I remember going there and about when I was 13, and a little placard said, "We get too old too fast, too smart too late." That's true too. So I'm at an advantage from most of you. And I understand also why older people get grumpy. And that's because they've seen the same shit generationally, like what, maybe 4, 5, 6 times around. And I mean, I was part of the young and dumb too. I understand that. Some listen more than others. I think I did to a certain extent, not as much as I should have, but certainly more than others had. Because they understand where it's at. And there are, it's funny because when I was young, I looked at some guys that used to be pro ball players. And I sized myself up looking at them. And here they are, like, 70 years old or something. I'm like, yeah, dude, you ain't anything. And I'm like, wait a second. How do you know what they were like in their own cohort, in their own time? They don't look at anything now because, what does Willie Mays look like now? What does Mickey Mantle look like now? He's dead. And then you start to realize you can't look at it that way. You got to look at everyone in their time. And that's when I started to listen a little bit more because I realized that there were some guys who were dudes in their time. And if they were in your cohort or you were in theirs, they'd kick your ass. Who can't slap around a 70-year-old or a 75-year-old? That's not the point. So then I got a lesson in, okay, fine. What anybody was in their time, they would have been in your time, given the same exposure to the same influences, both negative and positive. So enough said about that. But I'm just saying at this point, I'm looking around, and some of the things I see take place, I think I've gotten past the being upset. I am now starting to laugh because the whole thing becomes such a flustercock. It really does. And it's never going to change. And I understand that too. All right, so here we are. I'm getting emails from people. It's nice they want to, like for instance, we'll take this thing that happened with the Arizona shooter. And it's nice that they say, well, what do you think? But I have to tell you where I'm at right now. Now understand, I was in the Paytridiot thing for solidly from late 2001. I started probably at the beginning of that year. Started the show with Harry in June and July, I forget, of 2002. And I was, a steadfast listener, and I bought my Berkey and I bought my Miracle 2 neutralizer gel and all this stuff. And I'm not sorry I did, But, there was nobody that was more devoted. I should have had a little Mickey Mouse hat ears and a little pin that said, ooh, you really are a dedicated Paytridiot listener. And then I found out, once I got inside the beast, just how bullshit they are, too. Every bit as much as mainstream. But that's for later. People ask me what I think about the Arizona shooter. I don't know. And I don't feel the need to try to figure it out or guess it. And I'll tell you why. Let me ask you this. You remember the Nickel Mines shooting in 2006? And the Bailey, Colorado school shooting in 2006? You remember the Omaha shopping mall shooting in 2007? How about the Northern Illinois shooter? Of course, you more or less remember the Virginia Tech shooter. That gets brought up every so often. Remember Columbine in 99 and the real story behind that? What about the Dunblane massacre in Scotland in 96? You remember that? How about Port Arthur in 03? You remember that? No, you don't. or at least you have forgotten about it. And that's my point. Here's where I'm going with this, okay? And also this comes under the heading of you can't have it both ways. People still think that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter. What am I going to tell you? They had a commission that came out in '77 and said there is a conspiracy. Under Gerald Ford, I guess that was. There is a conspiracy. And then the question was, okay, then nothing. And that's the way it goes. It just disappears. Nobody pursues it. And if anybody tries to pursue it who's JQ public, you're going to get crushed. And I don't mean you're going to be threatened or anything like that. You're just not going to get through. Because that's the way the thing is built. If any of you listen to Lusitanian, especially the last three, you understand the anatomy of a cover-up. Well, it was easier then. Well, I'm not so sure. Because now, even in the advent of TV and all the first accounts that were broadcasted, and this goes also for the Murrow building bombing, they all disappeared. Some people have saved it, I've saved some stuff, but it's all disappeared. Nobody remembers the contradictions, what everyone's first impression was of what happened at the trade towers, that is bombs, what happened at the Pentagon, and that was bombs, and Shanksville is a complete mess. But even though that those first accounts go out, they never show again. Anybody who's got their VCR running had captured them, and that was good. Other than that, you'll never see those things again, and there's a reason for that as well. You remember what I was saying to you before, and we did this thing on Jamie McIntyre, and his take about, well, there's no sign of a plane at this building, and then they bring back on CNN to do the damage control, and of course they don't play the whole tape of all the things that McIntyre said, and then McIntyre's brought out there to say, well, what I really meant was, and blah, 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 and fine. Now McIntyre's not with CNN anymore. How does it feel, asshole? Yeah, they only eat their young. So that's the way it goes. So it's easier now to do a cover-up because after the original incident happens, how many people actually captured the very first accounts? After that, there's a closing of ranks, and there is a damage control thing, and then 24/7 broadcast media and newspapers and everything else just bang you consistently with the way you should think about it. I mean, one of the greatest things about that recording that Jim Kosher did with Tuesday Morning in September is that he doesn't really have the radio or TV on when he's filming the towers being impacted and what happens after that, because he's out on a fire escape in an apartment building in Jersey City, and he's watching it and giving it a running monologue. And he's saying, there's bombs there. I mean, because that's what it looks like, and rightly so to everyone. But then what happens is the media comes on and tells you what you saw. What am I going to tell you? And it works. All right. Now, hey, listen. Was the Arizona shooter mind control? I don't know. And I don't feel the necessity, as I'm sure some of you or all of you have heard on these Paytridiot shows, where the hosts come out real quick and start popping off, and they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But they have to do it to keep you listening. They don't know. They can guess just like I can guess. Now, the problem also with something like the Arizona shooting is because what happens is, legitimately, news agencies go down there and they start interviewing anything that's got a pulse. They'll talk to anybody. I mean, when this first happened, as it broke, I was sitting here doing something, listening to, on the internet, WCBS 880 AM out of New York. They had her dead. So, and then I came back on, well, maybe, and well, man, she's dead. Nobody knows. And it goes back and forth because there's no spokesperson as yet set up. It's just a complete chaotic situation where news people go down there, stick a mic in front of anybody, and it's like, tell us what happened. And then you got to sort through all this stuff. So I don't know. What was interesting about this situation was this is the first time that they actually had an accomplice thought of being involved with this guy. Then all of a sudden it was, oh, no, that didn't happen. Yeah, I find it interesting because most other times there is some kind of question as to how one person could have done all the shooting, and then they don't want to hear about accomplices. And this happened with the Omaha shooting, where some person And I don't want to get into all this, because, you can check this out for yourself. But anyway, what happened was, while this story was running, as it was unfolding, one account had a gentleman in camos hiding under a bench in a bus kiosk, and he was arrested. But the situation kept going. So what was that all about? Was it a second shooter? Some people apparently had different descriptions. Didn't sound like the same guy. The weapons were different also. A Kalashnikov, one said it was being used. Another said no, it was like an AK or an AR or whatever. Difference being is that you have to hand load a Kalashnikov, which takes time, whereas you can pop out the clips on the other one. All right, that's just an example of what goes on. And one of the interesting things happened also. I had done a series of Columbine and Port Arthur in Australia and Dunblane in Scotland. These shootings. Dunblane was the earliest in 96. Columbine was in 99, as I just said before. And Port Arthur was 03, I believe. And they all smell. What was really dynamic was at the time I was doing this, the author of a book, Dunblane Massacre, was now starting to put together what she had not put together before about what was not right about that shooting as well. Different caliber bullets, I believe they found. How did this guy shoot himself with one gun when apparently what he was killed by wasn't that caliber? And it all came together. It was really interesting to listen to that awakening in light of everything else. And then that whole shooting made more sense. I don't know, gun control at the end of it, I guess. So, but what my point is that how does that change things? What does it mean to you? And I'm not saying you shouldn't have any kind of feelings about or be bereaved about the violence, but the point is, I don't want to get into the anatomy of any of this stuff because it just doesn't apply to me. And what I mean about that is, what is the NWO to you? What is the threat from the NWO to you? To me, it's an agency, an organization, both massive and yet at the same time amorphous, that wants a total control. And Dickie's very upset about that. Dickie and Denny are here. I like them. Am I supposed to do a professional broadcasting thing and sound really erudite? And blow all kinds of flatulence through you, but it sounds good. It's guns and butter. It's Ralph Schoen asshole. Whatever. Dave Emery. I mean, my God, are you still listening to Islamofascism? Oh, my God, please, somebody, shoot me. At any rate, and what makes it crack up about Emery is that he's always after the Bushes. And then when we had the situation where 9/11 certainly was known about throughout the administration, it's not a Republican thing, it's not a Bush thing. But the thing is, this was a Pearl Harbor, and everybody knew it, except the poor innocents that were killed in it. And he had the chance to nail Bush, but he didn't. You know why? Because it takes away from his Islamofascism. He'd rather hammer Muslims more so than the president. So he's bullshit, too. And here's where I'm going. How much time do you all have to waste to listen to this stuff 24/7? Doesn't a seat of your pants ever get sore? Don't you have sores down there? Is this what life is for you? Pressing your nose against the screen and listening to this crap 24/7? Okay, if it is, fine. But you ain't doing anything. You're not helping anything. You're not getting anything done. You're not raising any hell. You just don't have a life. And admit it, because you don't want to have one. It's better to be a victim and feel sorry for yourself. And that's what most of this stuff is, all this commiseration and these endless blogs with endless verbiage. Oh, my God, it's sickening. Everybody's mad at the government. Everybody's giving the finger to the government. Everybody's calling them fucktards and everything else. And what? So what? What are you doing? They're running the show. You're doing shit. So you're not getting anything done. You're not really informed. Because one of the things also about Patriot Radio, it is 99.9% erroneous. I'll say there's good stuff about health. I picked up a lot of good things about that. But it's not like that's the only place that does it. I guess I'm fortunate, but I have 2 radio shows down here on 1250 WHNS that, they get it. They get it. They're homeopathic. And I don't have to go to the internet for that. But that's a good source. But people like send stuff around about, oh, look at this legislation that's going through. Da, da, da. Oh, sign this. Hey, tell me about that petition, by the way, about that piece of legislation that came down the pike, where people wrongly misconstrued it as you're not allowed to grow anything in your backyard. I'm not saying it's not going to go there. We talked about this late last year. But that's not what that legislation says. So anyway, people get all wrought up. They sign petitions electronically. I'm going to tell you right now, they don't do anything. But you can find it out for yourself. So how did that go? Legislation is being passed left and right that barely any of us have any idea about. And I'll give you an example. One day, Harry, my former partner, came upstairs in the library and said to me, he goes, geez, I was a little surprised to see this. I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, and we walked over to my terminal. He goes, pull this up on thomas.loc.gov. And I did. And it shows there where the IRS is conforming its accounting practices to align with an international standard. Do you know that happened? No, you don't. Mainstream media and the Paytridiot radio networks are not going to tell you, one, because the first won't, and the second, if they get there, they get there. But my point is, that's what's happening. And you didn't even know it. And you're worried about voting in good government when this crap happens all the time, whether there's a Ron Paul in the House or not. Now, what's going to happen with these characters in the Tea Party is that the Tea Party is great concept, good stuff to say, this is the change. Well, what happened was you got some Tea Party members elected. Now watch what happens when they get consumed and assimilated into what is known as D.C. See what happens. Because now it's no longer a concept. It's no longer shining and error-free. Now it's reality. Watch what happens. Because the deal is going to be, once you get down there with the old bastards and whores, they're going to say, it goes like this, kid. You want to get reelected again? And I had to laugh because, I understand this, but it just shows you what you got as far as statesmen go, or stateswomen, okay? Who's the woman from Minnesota? Bachman? She's on the Today Show. So she was, somewhat propped up, given stuff to say. Really, okay, I'll just say that. So she goes out and has to speak to something. Okay, and well, how much governing have you really done so far? None. And Meredith Vieira, just like Matt Lyer, who asked the real tough questions, and the laugh track, the human laugh track, Al Falstaff Roker. So they're asking, Michelle Bachmann or whatever, I don't know. And she spits out these answers, and that's okay. But then what happens is Vieira, for whatever reason, starts to kind of nail her. I'm surprised because usually there's this love fest that goes on all the time. But Vieira starts banging her. And Bachmann now isn't ready for this, and she's not deep enough in the knowledge. She's probably recited it, memorized it somewhat, did a little bit of a Q&A with somebody, and didn't expect this. And you can tell when somebody, and that would include me or anyone else who's not deep in whatever information and is sent out to try to address someone or something, you can tell they're not comfortable and that they almost have to rewind the tape and go back to the beginning and go, no, okay, here we are, item 3, right. And, I would say it's painful to watch, but now it's just like regular fare. I mean, not as bad as Sarah Palin. I mean, little train chimp that they put in little outfits and they tell her to say things and they push her out in front of the stage, Yeah, right. Blood libel. She knows what blood libel was. Are you serious? She can't even name a magazine on the newsstands. You remember that thing with Katie Couric? Oh, I read them all. Well, what are they? Well, Alaska's not as much out there as you think. Hello, come back here. Sarah, what are they? What's the titles of the magazines? Oh, jeez. Oh, that's pathetic. So, at any rate, Bachman didn't know what was going on. Couldn't talk to it. And then goes back, reaches for a couple of things she said before. And, it's like, who thought about putting her out there? And I don't know what got into Vieira unless that was the deal. Unless they suckered her to come on because, I don't know, the Rockefeller-backed party or whatever doesn't want the Tea Party to work. It might have been an ambush. It was an interesting little bit of a video. And, my wife and I are sitting there and going, look at this. She can't talk to it. You can see she's uptight as heck thinking, thank you for sharing that with us. All right, so going back to this whole thing, you know that mainstream news is managed. You believe that Paytridiot radio isn't. And it isn't to a great extent. But don't ever forget one thing, that there are people and there are organizations that back certain show hosts and networks with money to shoot something to you. So in that sense, they're no different. Now, you know from what I've done in years gone by, with the Informer, that pretty much was trail's end for me. When you realize that your government is, the whole story is false. It's a matrix of someone else's device that we're caught in. But we think that the Patriots are okay because, well, they're not mainstream news. They're not. And if they're doing it for a living, or they expect a lot of money out of it, you're not going to get truth, because truth is the first casualty with money. And I've been through this before about money changes everything. Because you cannot afford to alienate audience. You must keep them there. So you'll lie, you'll tell them the best stuff you can, and of course the lies will be, well, this is what I heard, a source close to the blah, blah, blah said this to me. Someone else, only under anonymity would say that, Joyce and Dave, how many times I have to listen to chatter? Well, I hear chatter, none of it ever came true. Now, some other lunkhead is saying something, or a bunch of them are, that we're going to see a whole bunch of indictments. Oh, that Fulford, by the way, he's an asshole too. It's a Yakuza that run the world. Yeah, okay. So now he's got it. There's going to be this mass indictment. It's going to come like within 10 days. Stay tuned. And then, of course, when it proves to be false, will anybody say, hey, what is wrong with you? And this is the really sad thing about the whole Paytridiot audience, and that is they show no value for accurate information and show no disdain for inaccurate information. Why? Because these idiots, these simps who have nothing else going for themselves, who listen 24/7, and I don't give a shit whose feelings I hurt. If you're that way, you know what it's about. Call it what it is. Because I was there and I got sick of it. Because I'm not going to go ahead and fall in love with some of these show hosts or be their friends or be inside their circle if they're putting out bullshit. That's the one thing I have to say about me, and that is, I don't want any of you to be my friend. It's not necessary for you to be my friend. I don't care if you're my friend. I don't care if you hate me. But what I do care about is whether or not you believe you're getting accurate information without all the bells and whistles and bullshit that you get out there. So they'll tell you anything. They'll tell you that the Lusitania, arose from the depths. And everybody will be like, oh, can you imagine that? And you'll believe it. So this is the other section of the country, probably only 1% of that, who doesn't demand truth, who doesn't demand analytical pursuit of information. They want to like someone, and they liked me, and I don't want you to like me. And I never had anybody supporting me, so I never had to play to anybody's tune. And I didn't do things just to be rogue or controversial. I did them because that was the truth, and as much as it's hard to swallow sometimes, guess what? That's the way it is. But most of the Patriot audience doesn't want that. None of the other 299,900 whatever people, they don't want it either. And yet we're supposed to believe that there's going to be this resurgence, this uprising, this revolution in America. We're going to take our country back, never had it. We're going to take our Constitution back, never had it. Well, all I'm asking is, show me some results. Show me some effort. Whenever I hear this crap about, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're taking this back, it doesn't have to be this way, blah, 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 I'm like, okay, so just show me what's going on. What are you doing? Are you getting up on a soapbox in Trafalgar Square? Are you talking down at the local Safeway or Giant or Piggly Wiggly or Pathmark? Are you doing anything? Are you putting yourself out there in the street? No. Why? Well, I get a family. Okay. I get a mortgage. Okay. Well, I get a job and a pension. Okay. All understandable. But then shut the fuck up. Shut up. Don't talk, because everybody talks a good fight, and that just doesn't cut it. And what we got are a lot of people blowing a lot of beer muscle and internet muscle, and they don't do shit. And every time I ask them, show me something, I get this. Well, this is going to happen. No. I don't want to hear it in the future tense. What did you do today? What did you try to do today? Well, why don't you do something? I'm not. And I admit I'm not. Because I know this is an unwinnable battle. You may not want to hear it, but it's an unwinnable battle. In fact, it's so unwinnable that you can't even put a dent in the shin of any of these characters because it's that far gone. And I crack up about these people who talk about, well, the Royals aren't that smart. I don't care. You know? And I got into this with someone, and I'm like, they're not smart? All right. They got the power. I don't care what their IQ is. They're running the show. They're doing stuff. They've been at this with their generational antecedents for how long? They know what they're doing. If they're not smart, that's fine. You can make all kinds of fun of it, but you know what? They're kicking your ass every day, so shut up. The most you can do at least is respect the fact that they got it together and you don't, and we don't. And that's just the way it is. You want to live in another parallel universe, go ahead, but do not be on my side. Don't come even near me, because you're full of shit, and I've seen it all my life, and I've had enough of it. And the places to where it's spreading, I can't even believe. But the bottom line is this. Go out and do it. Shut up. Sending all this stuff around like it's like, well, you know what it does? It's like I said with Denton. It creates psychosis. Or at least it's just something that keeps all the little chimpanzees happy. You know, they got, new fire. What do you want me to tell you? That's just the way it is. And talking doesn't get it done. But once again, the Paytridiot audience doesn't demand results. They really don't even demand actions. They just like to talk about it. You know, I can understand that the 20-somethings who have nothing else to do, those, you know, who come up in the high school of Jeff Spicoli, well, man, like, wow, that's awesome. Like, we're going to get our country. Yeah, you're right. Meanwhile, Alex Jones is getting fatter and richer all the time. Oh, don't you say anything about Alex. Yeah, okay, fine. You know, and who do you like? Oh, you like Joyce and Dave? That's great. Who else is out there? Oh, God almighty. What is his name, that idiot? Oh, they blew up the Gulf Stream. That was the best. Oh, Deagle. The Beagle. Yeah, right. That's beautiful. So, I'm not upset about it. I mean, you know, again, I'm coming to the point where it's like, well, why am I doing it? I don't know. You know, some people say it's worth it. Okay, I guess that's okay. I'm just doing a running commentary on this. You know, that's it. It's like throwing a message out in a bottle. I'm not going to be around for when it lands somewhere. I don't care. You know, to me, it's just the idea, which I can't take to my grave, really, or at least beyond it, not that I want to, about, hey, you know what, he called it right. And I did, because I have no dog in this hunt. I don't care about anything. I have no favorites. I don't protect anybody. I don't look to kill anybody. It's just, I'm just telling you the way it is. I never ask for money, never ask for donations. I have sold merchandise from time to time. Recently, we have the Informers conference up. That money goes to Angie. I appreciate what she does. She deserves that and 10 times more. But I'm glad to do that. So I'm not doing it for the money, man. I mean, in fact, I probably would be a little bit better off over these last 10 years if I never even got involved in this, but nobody asked me to do it. Nobody asked me to stay. I understand it, but I paved my own way. You know, whatever advertising I had back in the days in the AM station, for the most part, they were local merchants whom I patronized. And actually what it came down to was just a wipe. Whether it was, you know, the Great Thai Restaurant, it was Shannon's Produce, I went to all of them, and really it was just an exchange. So what did we do? We got produce, and I ate for free for as much as I went out. And we're talking to the tune of about $200 a month. All right? That's it. Nobody called any shots. Nobody asked me to do anything, and I would not have it. And if somebody said you can't do this, I'd be gone. So here I am now. Actually never kicked out of the AM stations until they brought in different programming, which has turned over 3 times. So, you know, it wasn't like and then actually once I just had to leave because they were letting the station go into such disrepair, and I'm still paying the same money for a station that does less for me. So what does that tell you? So it's been a battle, and I'm not complaining, but don't anybody tell me I haven't earned, you know, my shingles. So the bottom line is this also. I don't care about the Arizona shooter and whether it was a government op or not. What difference does it make? If you find it's a government op, what are you going to do? Don't you suspect that I do? You know, I don't care. It isn't a game to me. It isn't a parlor game. It isn't an exercise of my intellect to find out what the deal is. I've been through all that. You know, I don't care if the birds, I mean, I'm sorry that there are dead birds falling and fish, you know, I mean, that's horrible. But the cause of it, you may never know. Is it HAARP? I don't know. You don't know. Who knows? And I do suspect, and I said this to Paul Sander, that there's a lot of stuff going on that probably is experimentation on us, whether we like it or not. It may even be as grotesque as something being done as kind of a baboon chest-pounding exercise to show the other countries this is what we have. I'm not kidding you, but I don't know. And it doesn't matter. You see, the same people that accuse the government of being able to do all this stuff are the ones who say we can overthrow it, and you can't. So you can't have it both ways, and that's where I'm going with this. You know, we're not in the days of you got guns, I got guns, you got cannons, I got cannons, you know, or before that, you know, you got bows and arrows, I got bows and arrows. It's gone. Now we got guns, and they got, my God, I don't know, space-based weaponry. Are you serious? They can't wait to use EMPs or anything else. You know, they can fry your brain right there, no big deal. They can make you shit your pants. You know, there ain't going to be any bullets. They're not going to waste that on you. And so you can't have it both ways. If the world's elites and governments and militaries are all about this, then you know also that you can't do anything. So don't beat your head against the wall about it. But if that makes you feel good, and I'm assuming that it does for most people, which is one of the reasons why they have no brains left. That's what they want to do. What is interesting to me, because it impacts my life, and I'm thinking about ways that I can indemnify us, and that is what the world government is going to do. One, it's not going to leave you alone. It's all about totalitarianism. And I don't see anything that in humankind that's going to change that. I hear all this stuff about, well, we can do that. You know, again, every single time I ask this, I cannot drive it home more clearly. And those of you who are listening to this and think I'm talking about you, and in fact, if I am talking about you, here's the deal. Produce it. You got a mortgage? I'm sorry. You got children? I'm sorry. But unless you risk it, unless you risk everything, you ain't doing shit. Now, I would advise you not to. But you can sit there in your zip code, in your tony little neighborhoods, and you can yak all you want. You're no different than anyone else. You're no different than the Alex Jones you don't like. We got him on the run. How do you do that, Alex? How do you get him on the run? Show me something. How do you have him on the run? Did the Bilderberg stop meeting? No. And the other thing about the internet is you can find some jerk who's written something to back up your point. Just because somebody wrote something and you send it to me as support for like your viewpoint, what does that mean? Oh, it was published on the net or anywhere else. It must be true. No. Like I said about that thing about, the royal bloodlines, they aren't that pure. Well, of course they're not that pure. They're supposed to not be pure. What happens is you get, now I wouldn't say incestuous, but the gene pool starts to degrade. So you always want to bring in the best of what there might be on the outside. And the example I made is that's why Prince Charlie married Diana. Supposedly a commoner, although it's thought that she was in the Stuart line, and the Stuart are the ones who say they are the legitimate heirs to the throne, and the Windsors usurped it, but that's fine. So he married a commoner babe. I mean, what was she thinking about when she married him? I mean, look at him. He's uglier than a can of hookworms, man. He looks like he's got a head like Seattle Slew. But, of course, he's royalty and he gets to wear kilts and nobody makes fun of him. And actually, by the way, he actually could be a dude. Paratrooper, all that stuff. Now, his two sons are going to marry babes that are commoners. It's good for the gene pool. I don't know. So where am I going with this? It's like this person writes it. I'm like, okay, what am I supposed to take from this? What is this? This guy's like community college history paper? This is bullshit. Get it out of here. So you see, and you get stuff sent along. It's like, well, you can find anything to support your argument. That doesn't make it right. And the people who read information and process information have to figure out who's more right or who's got the heavier weight support. That's it. Now, what am I concerned about? Where the elites are going. So what I did was I sent around this thing that Hawkeye Hannah had sent me just as a heads up from the World Economic Forum. These are people who don't like us because we're little people. We're peons, and they get to sit on top of the dunghill. And they always meet in Davos, Switzerland, because Switzerland is a nice place to meet. So I would say is if you want to avoid a lot of destruction, go to two places, Colorado or Switzerland. Somewhat kidding. So the World Economic Forum has told us what is going to happen. Do they know it? Absolutely, because they're going to cause it. And I have said months back, and you guys have heard this, and it was all about the money, the food, the energy, and the last one, when they come for the water, things are bad. I don't know what's going to happen before a war or after a war or whatever. But you see, the thing is, whereas everybody's running their mouths about how the world's elite aren't smart enough, aren't this, they're getting stuff done, you aren't. All right, so let's take a look at this World Economic Forum and what it's come up with. It said the two risks are especially significant given their high degree of impact and interconnectedness. Economic disparity and global governance failures. Both influence the evolution of many other global risks and inhibit our capacity to respond effectively to them. In this way, the global risk context in 2011 is defined by a 21st century paradox. As the world grows together, it is also growing apart. Globalization has generated sustained economic growth for a generation. It has shrunk and reshaped the world, making it far more interconnected and interdependent. Those two words are buzzwords which they will shove down your throat forever. The big word, interdependent. And as the late Joan Vion pointed out, this is where it's at. But the benefits of globalization seem unevenly spread. A minority is seen to have harvested a disproportionate amount of the fruits, although the growth of the new champions is rebalancing economic power between countries. There is evidence that economic disparity within countries is growing. Issues of economic disparity and equity at both the national and the international levels are becoming increasingly important. Politically, these are signs of resurgent nationalism and populism. Of course, we can't have that, as well as social fragmentation. There is also a growing divergence of opinion between countries on how to promote sustainable, inclusive growth. To meet these challenges, improved global governance is essential. But this is another 21st century paradox. The conditions that make improved global governance so crucial, divergent interests, conflicting incentives, and differing norm and values, are also the ones that make its realization so difficult, complex, and messy. High-tech word to use in this white paper, huh? Messy. As a result, we see failures such as the Doha Development Roundtable of the World Trade Organization and the lack of international agreement at the Copenhagen Conference on Climate Change. The G20 is seen as the most hopeful development in global governance, but its efficiency in this regard has not been proven. And again, listen to these buzzwords, because what they're trying to say, this is good and this is bad, and they'll beat you over the head with it. Like, for instance, where are we with this? And I can't see who's doing really well in this, because every damn nation's in debt anyway. But it said, signs of resurgent nationalism, they don't want it. Resurgent populism, they don't want it. And also social fragmentation, which they blame on the first two. So there you go right there. Those are the poison words. All right, now we move to, honestly, go to the World Economic Forum and download the Global Risk 2011 6th edition. Let's see. 3 important risks in focus. Beyond these 2 cross-cutting global risks, 3 important clusters of risks have emerged in this year's analysis. The, quote, macroeconomic imbalances nexus, a cluster of economic risks including macroeconomic imbalances and currency volatility. Fiscal crises and asset price collapse arise from the tension between the increasing wealth and influence of emerging economies and high levels of debt in advanced economies. Somebody tell me where the emerging economies are. You can say China, but they always tell you they got problems too. High levels of debt in advanced economies. I mean, what's the difference between emerging economies and advanced economies? I mean, The emerging ones get to be advanced, and they're all having problems. So, I mean, again, it's like blah, blah, blah. Savings and trade imbalances within and between countries are increasingly unsustainable, while unfunded liabilities create extreme long-term pressure on fiscal positions. One way out of these imbalances would be coordinated global action, but this is challenging given the conflicting interests of different states. So what are they going to say? You different states don't have conflicting interests. All right, here we go. Quote, the illegal economy nexus. This nexus examines a cluster of risks including state fragility, illicit trade, which everybody's involved with, organized crime and corruption, one of the leading industries everywhere, a networked world. Governance failures and economic disparity create opportunities for such illegal activities to flourish. Man, without that, they've always been the same. Nothing new. In 2009, the value of illicit trade around the globe was estimated at in U.S. terms of $1.3 trillion and growing. Excuse me. These risks, while creating huge costs for legitimate economic activities, also weaken states, threatening development opportunities, undermining the rule of law, and keeping countries trapped in cycles of poverty and instability. International cooperation, both on the supply side and demand side, is urgently needed. But there's been no international cooperation. I mean, how many times do you have to see people go down to Haiti, throw some bucks at them if they ever get it, and leave, and now there's another problem down there now. Nothing's meant to be done there on a permanent basis. And there's other stuff about what? What does illicit trade do? It weakens states? How? Like what? Threatening development opportunities? How? Undermining the rule of law, and that's something I can't stand to listen to. The rule of law will be wrapped around your face for the rest of your life. I mean, they say this stuff, and it's like, well, how does this happen? All right, here we go. And this is where I'm going. Here we are. The water, food, energy nexus. A rapidly rising global population and growing prosperity are putting unsustainable, and I'm so sick of that word, pressures on resources. Demand for water, food, and energy is expected to rise by 30 to 50% in the next 2 decades. While economic disparities incentivize, that's it, they made a verb out of that, incentivize short-term responses in production and consumption that undermine long-term sustainability. Shortages could cause social and political instability, and they're counting on it, geopolitical conflict and irreparable environmental damage. They'll threaten you with this. Any strategy that focuses on one part of the water, food, energy nexus without considering its interconnections risks serious unintended consequences. I would take the off unintended. 5 risks to watch. And, of course, this is what they're going to bring to you. 5 risks have been designated as risks to watch, as survey respondents assess them with high levels of variance and low levels of confidence, while experts consider they may have severe, unexpected, or underappreciated consequences. The first one. Cybersecurity issues ranging from the growing prevalence of cyber theft to the little understood possibility of all-out cyber warfare. Demographic challenges, adding to fiscal pressures in advanced economies, and creating severe risks to social stability in emerging economies. Look. Demographic challenges. What does that mean? What does that mean? Are we talking also about demographic shifts as taking certain, peoples and moving them somewhere else, what they call ingrafting, so that, for instance, how many illegal immigrants in Mexico here? All right, we'll move on. Sorry about the stuttering on emerging economies. Damn, the mind's a horrible thing to lose. All right, resource security issues causing extreme volatility and sustained increases over the long run in energy and commodity prices if supply is no longer able to keep up with demand. Like, that matters. Did it ever matter? Retrenchment from globalization through populist responses to economic disparities if emerging economies do not take up a leadership role. Weapons of mass destruction, especially the possibility of renewed nuclear proliferation between states. And finally, it says effective risk response is not only about proactively reducing the downsides associated with global risks, it is also about seizing the opportunities for innovation and growth that may arise. Throughout this report, a series of risk response strategies are explored that can help stakeholders achieve both goals. Now, you can read this for yourself, and I really implore you to do so, just so you understand what's going to happen to us. Because what they project, they create. The future that they envision is the present they make. And that's what they're going to do. And they're going to stick it right up your giggy and do it. And that's all there is to it. Now, what I would say this year especially, you're going to see a revisiting of a spike in gas prices. Kramer, out of the side of his mouth, said $4.30 a gallon. That's it. Others are saying it's going to hit $5 this year. Also, you're going to see food prices rise, if nothing else, except for the fuel increase. And then, of course, you have commodity trading, which is also blamed for the spike in prices both in petroleum and in food. It doesn't matter how it happens. You don't care how it happens, except if you can think you can fix it. And, of course, if you're dealing with commodity trading, you can't do a thing about it. So you're going to see food rise again. It's never returned to its former levels as we saw, 2008 or so, but it's going to go up again. Energy is going to be a real problem. And I'll tell you down here in Florida, for instance, the way they built homes here, remember, for the most part, we have cinder block homes on concrete slabs. They hold the cold in the wintertime. They hold the heat in the summertime. They are, energy-wise, they are inefficient. Most aren't zonal heating or air conditioning. And I think anybody down here or anywhere else that's involved with air conditioning and heating should get into the business of zoning, of turning central into zonal, and that will work out much better. Why they built two-family homes down here, I have no idea, because that only makes everything worse unless you have bi-level control over both heat and cold. Most people don't, and air conditioning, not cold. Oh, cold. That is air conditioning. Most people don't, and if they would go and now get into the habit of converting, that will work. They won't do it, and they'll scream later on. And that's why I'm saying to you, I mean, this is what they're coming for. That's what you know. They've given you fair warning, but you want to listen and worry about HARP and MK Ultra shooters and UFOs. What else? You know, you see where I'm coming with this? I'm only concerned with the important stuff. All this other stuff is just stuff that people want to do because they have nothing else to do. They don't watch game shows. They listen to Patriot Radio. They don't do this. They listen to Patriot Radio. You know, UFOs, are they out there? Yeah. Do I care? No. Are they going to be good for us? Absolutely not. Don't have any doubt in the fact that they're there, whether we made them or something else made them or they both made them. It doesn't matter to me. It's just another threat that will come in time. What do you want me to do about it? You know, I mean, it's just, you want to, again, how much time do you have to waste? Now I'm going to move to something I think that really is at the core of what's going on. I was going to do a show and read all these documents. I'm not going to do it. And you don't really want to hear it. However, I will send you the documents, and I think that they represent exactly what we are living under. I think that will probably answer a lot of questions as to the validity of the things I'm saying and what is presently going on. I'll give you the titles of them in a second. But let me go to one thing in particular, the emergency powers statutes, okay? Senate Report 93-549. In this 1973 official report, the U.S. Senate admits that the emergency powers given to the President under the pretense of the national emergency of 1933 have remained in force and that the normal function of the federal government has been suspended. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I sent this to somebody when we went back and forth about something. Somebody I don't even know. It was a third party in an email or whatever. And I sent this, you know, to explain something. I got an email back, you know, didn't even matter. Didn't even address it. And that's what you're going to find with people who don't care about it. If you care about it, you'll understand. If you don't, fine. So, I mean, it was just like, why am I even bothering with this guy? Because it's like, hello, don't you understand, asshole? Asshole, don't you understand? Frig your Constitution. It doesn't matter. You're under this stuff. All right? And there it is. You know, what can I tell you? 93rd Congress, Senate Report number 93549, first session. There it is. Emergency power statutes, provisions of federal law now in effect delegating to the executive extraordinary authority in time of national emergency or of the Special Committee on the Termination of the National Emergency United States, Senate November 19th, 1973, and they didn't terminate the emergency powers. They just talked about it. All right? And then he moved down further. Again, I'll give this to you, okay? And it says, under the introduction, a majority of the people in the United States have lived all of their lives under emergency rule. For 40 years, freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have, in varying degrees, been abridged by laws brought into force by states of a national emergency. The problem of how a constitutional democracy reacts to great crises, however, far antedates the Great Depression. As a philosophical issue, its origins reach back to the Greek city-states and the Roman Republic. And in the United States, actions taken by the government in times of great crises have, from at least the Civil War, in important ways, shaped the present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. Hello, McFly. Now, this is a 17-page document. Knock yourself out, okay? The point of the matter is they never really rescinded all the elements of emergency powers, so you're under it always, which means kiss your Constitution goodbye if it ever meant anything to begin with, and it didn't. And I mean, there's so many salient things in here, but I mean, I just don't want to read them all to you. I mean, it's tiring, and you don't want to listen to it, but they're here if you want them. All you got to do is send me an email, visigoth@hotmail.com. We don't have to talk. We don't have to do anything. If you want to see them, I'll send them to you. If you want to look for them yourself, I'll give you the titles. Go take a look. All right. All I did was a little bit of the wet work for you. But if you feel that's not good enough or you want to look for yourself, hey, have a day. I'll give it to you. But I'm just laughing at some of the stuff that's in here that I bolded. For instance, at one point it says, the Trading with the Enemy Act had, however, been specifically designed by its originators to meet only wartime exigencies. By employing it to meet the demands of the Depression, Roosevelt greatly extended the concept of, quote, emergencies, to which expansion of executive powers might be applied. And in doing so, he established a pattern that was followed frequently. In time of crisis, the President should utilize any statutory authority readily at hand, regardless of its original purposes, with the firm expectation of ex post facto congressional concurrence, which means absolutely nothing if it's after the fact anyway. So I got all this stuff here, and what I'm just telling you is that, because of the Emergency Banking Act, because of the Trading with the Enemy Act, we're screwed. And that's all there is to it. Now, you can take a look for it yourself if you so choose. Now, I'm going to read you something else that brings you up to date on what's going on. On the GATA, .org site, whatever it is, GATA, data.org, whatever, I don't know. You can take a look for it yourself. I don't know, somewhere back in January of 2005, Chris Powell, the Secretary-Treasurer of GATA, well, actually, it's Gold Antitrust Action Committee Incorporated, sends a letter. I'll read whatever gets to the point of the matter, all right? It says, Dear Ms. McInerney, Roberta K. McInerney, at that time was Assistant General Counsel, Banking and Finance Section, Department of the Treasury. Michael Kirk of U.S. Representative John P. Larson's office has forwarded to me your letter to him of December 17, which answered my emailed inquiry to him about forcible redemption by the Treasury Department of gold and silver coins held by private citizens. You replied that a statute empowering the Treasury Department to do that, 12 U.S.C. Section 248 N, had been repealed. But since reading your letter, I have learned of a similar statute, Title 12, Chapter 2, Subchapter 4, Section 95, which provides in part, quote, during the time of war, the President may, through any agency that he may designate, and under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe, by means of instructions, licenses, or otherwise, investigate, regulate, or prohibit any transactions in foreign exchange, transfers of credit, or payments between, by, through, or to any banking institution, and the importing, exporting, hoarding, melting, or earmarking of gold or silver coin or bullion, currency, or securities. Section 95A further authorizes the President to prevent the use by U.S. citizens of any property in which a foreign country or a national thereof has any interest. Those provisions are of the greatest concern to investors in gold and silver bullion, coins, and shares of gold and silver mining companies, and to those companies themselves. So the Gold Antitrust Action Committee urgently requests that the Treasury Department explain how it construes these provisions. All right, and then it goes on to other things that will be addressed in the letter. All right? This one I'm going to read in toto. Bear with me, but if you want to cut to the chase, you can go to whatever that website is, gata.org.com, whatever, and go check it out. So he gets a letter, Powell gets a letter from Sean M. Thornton, Chief Counsel, in parentheses, Foreign Assets Control, U.S. Department of the Treasury. And here's what he writes to Powell. The U.S. Code provision that you reference, 12 U.S.C. Section 95A, is a duplicate codification of Section 5 of the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, 50 U.S.C. App Sex 1-44, or TWEA, Trading with the Enemy, with respect to which my office bears responsibility for interpreting. As you may be aware, Congress enacted TWEA during World War I to prevent certain transactions that might be of advantage to an enemy during wartime. During World War II, the Treasury Department implemented extensive punitive blockings of Axis assets and protective blockings of Allied assets. In 1950, the United States imposed economic sanctions against the People's Republic of China as a result of the Korean emergency to prevent, among other things, Chinese acquisition of foreign exchange through transactions with Americans. The Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, began enforcing foreign asset control programs in the 1950s. Today, the only economic sanction programs administered by OFAC under TWEA are with respect to Cuba, North Korea, and certain third country transfers of sensitive materials. You have asked how the Treasury Department construes the term, quote, the time of war, unquote, which appears in Section 5B1 of TWEA. Although TWEA, once again, Trading with the Enemy Act, does not include a definition of the term, quote, during the time of war, unquote, it does include definitions for the terms, quote, the beginning of the war, quote, and, quote, end of the war, unquote. The words, quote, the beginning of the war, unquote, are deemed to mean, quote, midnight ending the day on which Congress has declared or shall declare war or the existence of a state of war, unquote. The words, quote, end of the war, unquote, are deemed to mean, quote, the date of proclamation, of exchange, of ratifications of the Treaty of Peace unless the President shall, by proclamation, declare a prior date, end of quote. Sorry to do this to you, man, but this is where it's at. Thus the phrase, I don't have to quote this, okay? During the time of war, unquote, would seem to cover the period between, here we go again, beginning of the war and the end of the war. All right, we don't give a crap about that. Since this period cannot come into existence without some form of congressional declaration, it would appear that TWEA, and here we go with the exception clauses, with the exception of its present applicability to the Cuba, North Korea, and transaction control programs referenced above, applies only to situations involving a declared state of war. In exercising any of the specific powers available to him under TWEA during the time of war, the President would issue an executive order or some similar instrument generally made available through publication in the Federal Register. All right, now let me take you back to where it said, since this period cannot come into existence without some form of congressional declaration, it would appear that TWEA, with the exception of its present applicability to Cuba, North Korea, and the transaction control programs referenced above, and now there's an asterisk. So we get down to the asterisk. Because there's always, with all this stuff, man, there's always like a da-da-da-da, except, or da-da-da, but in the case of, you know what I mean? There's always like the statement, which should be law, or in stone, and then except for, okay, this is the logic of the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And this is what makes people not want to check this out, because it's like, come on. You couldn't have written this no, of course, they just want to write it like this, so you get caught in a labyrinth. So the asterisk says, From the early 1930s until 1977, when the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was enacted, TWEA applied not only in times of war, but also in situations in which the president declared a peacetime national emergency. Pre-existing emergencies declared with respect to Cuba and North Korea and certain transaction controls were grandfathered, which explains why TWEA still serves as the basis for those sanctions programs, even though the United States is presently not in a state of war with respect to any of the affected countries. Making sense to you? It shouldn't, and you're right. The construction of the term hoarding, as used in Section 5B1 of TWEA, would depend on how the President chooses to exercise his authority with respect to hoarding in any particular instance. I would say, by the way, what's your definition of hoarding? Like, I'm saving? Oh, that's hoarding, if the President decides such. This is why your Constitution, you can wipe your ass with it because it doesn't mean shit. In making any decisions, we're back to the letter. In making any decisions under the authorities conferred by TWEA, the President would, of course, be taking steps to address threats to our national security during a time of war. In the past, the President has used TWEA or TWEA-like authorities to criminalize hoarding. If you got to criminalize hoarding, then it isn't a crime. If you have to criminalize it, that means it wasn't a crime. You have to make it a crime. See, generally, Bauer v. United States. You want me to go through this? No, you don't, but I will. 244F, period, 2D794, in parentheses, 9th CIR dot 1957, end of parentheses. I'll send you the manuscript. All right. Today, however, such activity is not restricted under the only sanctioned programs in effect pursuant to TWE, that is Cuba, North Korea, and the transaction control programs. If during a time of war the President expressly chose to restrict the hoarding of gold or silver, he could do so. Among the many factors the President would likely consider before taking such action, however, is the fact that the U.S. government now mints and issues gold and silver coins to meet public demand for both numismatic and investment purposes. They are? Where the hell that happened? I don't know. Okay. You also have asked about the President's ability to interfere with the ownership of shares in gold and silver mining companies merely because the shares of such companies also might be owned by foreign nationals or foreign governments at war with the United States or not at war. Under TWEA, during times of war, and also under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, 50 U.S.C. Secs 1701 to 05, parentheses, IEEPA, during peace, and that goes back to International Emergency Economic Powers, all right? During peacetime national emergencies, the President has broad powers to regulate property in which there exists a foreign interest. Well, if you're in a global economy, you see where this is going? If you're in a global economy, well, then everybody's involved in this. And then it says, all right, section bullshit. Okay, fine. You're not missing anything on that. The last paragraph, thank God. Consequently, the President may restrict shares in any company owned by foreign persons consistent with the purposes of any declared emergency. Well, who decides what's consistent with purposes of any declared emergency? In this respect, foreign-owned shares in gold and silver mining companies are no different from foreign-owned shares in companies in any other industry. Finally, you raise concerns about the instant destruction of gold and silver investors and the precious metals mining industry in the United States. In the establishment and implementation of sanctions, the U.S. government is always mindful of the domestic impact of restrictions meant to serve national security and foreign policy purposes. Just as the U.S. government has been mindful of the practical impact that sanctions have on various service and manufacturing industries, it would also be mindful of the potential impact of sanctions with respect to the markets and industries associated with precious metals. I hope you find this letter instructive. Thank you for your interest. If I can be of any further assistance, please call me. Sincerely, Sean M. Thornton, Chief Counsel, Foreign Assets Control, U.S. Department of the Treasury, Washington, D.C., 20220. Does this mean anything to you? Yeah, you know what it means to you? Anything goes. You got it? Anything goes. Stuff your Constitution. That's what you're under, and that's the way it will remain. You have no control over anything. All right, with regard to the titles of some of those documents that I think what you find most revealing, I'm just going to give you the names, 50 U.S.C. Chapter 13. All right. I have it down as 2039. All right, let me take a look at that. And that is the proclamation made by Franklin D. Roosevelt as a bank holiday, March 6th through 9th, 1933. Okay? The Banking Act, I believe they call that. So there you have that. All right? Emergency Power Statute, which I just read from. The Confiscation Act of 1861. The Lieber Code of 1863. And finally, Title 12, Chapter 2, Subchapter 4, 95A, which part of this you already heard from in that discussion with GATA and the Treasury Department. Now I'm going to read something once again that I-Man sent me in an email a while ago, quite a while ago. All right, he said, hell, let me read the whole thing. Same thing happened when the banks stole all the people's real money from 1921 to 1929, and when the run on the banks caused Roosevelt to declare the people the enemy of the banks under Proclamation Order 2039 in 1933. One of those docs I just told you I have. It was the Federal Reserve that actually wrote that amending law into the 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act to protect itself, not Congress. It was for the Fed, which had just been constructed in 1913. President Hoover refused to sign the Trading with the Enemy Act, amending portion that made Americans, for the first time, enemies of the banks. Roosevelt did it to protect his buddy Rockefeller of the Chicago Bank from going belly up for all the people's money, gold, he sent to Europe on bad business deals. What the hey? It wasn't his money, was it? Why should he care? Same as today. That's why a bank holiday closed all the banks for 6 days so they could all be licensed to deal with the enemy. That's us. It's still buried in 12 U.S.C. 95 A and B. You can have that if you care to research it. And while you're at it, pull 12 Stat 319 that made the American the enemy of the Congress. Read it if you don't believe me. Ron Paul said to me that he would not repeal those laws if made president. Eliminating them would make us all the free people we were before Lincoln installed 12 Stat 319 in 1862 under General Orders 100, also known as the Lieber Code, under Francis Lieber, that created the General Orders 100 to control anyone from questioning the government. Why do you think they created what he called the fatherland security here? It's the same as Hitler did in Germany. No difference except different countries. This government is the biggest terrorist ever. People never learn as history is repeating itself right before your eyes. A failure to know history causes the same thing to happen every 60 years or so. Before 1930, it was the silver panic in 1873. So history always does repeat itself, and the money changers are responsible. Just like the Wildcat Bank scams in 1835 that decimated this country's people, the real U.S. Treasury Bank existed from 1841 to 1921, when Congress abdicated its responsibility, eliminated the real U.S. Treasury, and turned banking over to the private Federal Reserve to act as its fiscal agency, who in turn shirked its agreement in 1916 and turned that duty over to the Bank of England, a private organization not belonging in any way to England, and which screwed the American people in 1930 and now in 2008. Paulson, that would be Henry, is not the Secretary of any real treasury before Congress destroyed that in 1921 by the Act of 1920. They made the Treasury a department only, and the UN created the International Monetary Fund, and ever since 1945, when the Bretton Woods Act was created, every governor of that fund was installed to run the private IRS collection agency so it could collect the funny money, which you know as a Federal Reserve note, which is nothing but a debt instrument that the bank puts a lien on the minute it's issued. Paulson is not paid by the U.S. government. He is not a U.S. official. He gets paid by the Bank of England. Don't believe me? Then read 60 Stat 1401 The service agreement the private corporation known as the IRS made with Congress under Treasury Decision 91 and Public Law 94-564, Legislative History, page 5967, and Reorganization Plan number 26. So Paulson and the chair of the private Federal Reserve screwed you again and want you to pay for their stealing from you. Congress has no clue of what I speak except for the Banking Commission, but they ain't going to tell you. The collusion is so deep, RICO, R-I-C-O, would have to wipe out the international bankers that run this country. Look how many times the money changers caused the same problem as we have now. 1835, wildcat banking failure started. 1873, 1930, 2008. So the bankers are getting smarter and prolonging the crash so they can steal most of the people's money, and yet, after all this is forgotten, the bankers will be allowed to start all over again. So there you go. I'll even send you that if you want it. That's the real world. That's the real history. Not sexy, but that's what you're living under. And understand something else also. I said to you folks a couple shows ago or whatever that the mainstream is now finally saying that certain levels of government are in trouble. They finally admitted that. That was on 60 Minutes, which really surprised me. Well, on CBS Radio, that would be yesterday, January 19th, maybe 18th. Won't matter. They are now admitting that probably 48 of the 50 states, and most likely 49, are in trouble. They're looking for Illinois to be the first to declare, they can't declare bankruptcy, but to declare insolvency. And they'll have to go to the federal government. The thought was, and this was echoed, and I read this to you before, that, as one analyst said, if one state government does it, the others will fall in behind it. So you're looking at a situation where you might have anywhere up to 48 or 49 states going to the federal government and saying, basically we're broke. The one state that they felt above all was solvent was Nebraska. But Illinois, its neighbor, 2 states to the east, will probably be the first one to go down. And now you got some severe problems. So look for that to happen. Another thing. You're going to find out probably if they don't dare raise property taxes, they're going to start hitting you with nuisance fees and taxes. So, again, under the idea of death by 1,000 cuts, you're going to just get nickel and dime. But it's going to start to add up without any doubt. New Jersey, for instance, I had a laugh about this one, is thinking about creating license plates for bikes with registration fees. Okay? They'll start off with $10 a plate. So if you got a family of 4, you're paying $40 a year. All right? Now just understand this too. Who the hell is going to go ahead and pull over, a 10-year-old? Because that 10-year-old has like an expired license. I mean, you see where this is going, and yet they'll try to do this. Okay? Why? What does it make safer? No, they just want a revenue stream that they can go for. And one that doesn't seem so bad because, after all, it's only $10 a plate. So look for that as well. Police departments are getting cut left and right. As I had said to Paul Sandu, 2 cities in New Jersey, one that's probably, I think, has the 3rd highest crime rate, Camden, New Jersey, and Newark, both cut their police departments. Newark by 20%, that after a weekend of 5 homicides by gun. Camden's going to fire half of its police. So this is what you're coming to. And there's no way out of this, by the way, unless they go after you, because they're not going to create more jobs. I mean, think about it. This is what I keep asking. Where's the jobs? You can't have any kind of recovery unless people are going to work. And the longer they stay out of work, and the more that their ranks are joined by others, you're going to have problems. Now, do you think they'll create martial law? I'm not worried about martial law. I'm worried about brigands and gangs and people who are just in duress breaking into homes who never had a criminal record. That's happening down here in Florida. It's probably happening in a neighborhood near yours. Or maybe yours, in fact. All right. So there you have it. We got them on the run. The New World Order's backtracking. And here's what I'm going to say. I've listened to Paytridiot radio for probably 12 years. Intensely for probably 4 before I realized it was bullshit too. Most of you folks listen to this stuff because you would rather listen to that than something else, and you spend all your time on your ass in front of your computer. That's up to you. Nobody has to do that, by the way. Okay? Nobody has to do that. You can do a lot of other things, even if you're wheelchair bound or you're homebound or whatever. There's other things that can be done. So I don't want to hear it. If you want friends and friendly voices to make your loneliness abate, fine. But don't ever impute to them any kind of real wisdom or accuracy in their forecast or their reportage, because it is not there. Because I was there, and they're full of shit. We used to do a game called Liar or Stupid. And that was with, even then, people who came out with news or, again, your Paytridiot group. And the thing is this. Nobody on any of those networks, if you want to call the big two, GC and RBN, and all the other ones that spun off, which I can't keep track of, and I never ever listen to. I mean, they're just so sorry. All right? None of them will tell you, because either they're stupid, or in this case, ignorant, or they're liars, that you're not getting your Constitution back because it wasn't yours to begin with. You're not getting your government back, which if you ever did have it, honestly, by the beginning of the 20th century, you were in deep sneakers. Because that's when the robber barons, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Carnegies and such, the Vanderbilts, cornered their money and then started cornering certain industries. And they got enough strength through the money to start buying influence, and then they went after the government. And then we bring you up to date, with the tax-exempt foundations who have done the most to make sure this country blends in with the others as they all enter into, what you're going to do is you're going to be in 10 regions, you're going to do this regionalization thing, and then you're going to be amalgamated under a world government. Now, we don't hear much anymore about the North American Union, which was supposed to have been implemented by 2010. So either one, they're late, or two, they don't care anymore. I don't know. I don't hear anything more about the NASCO corridor, whatever the hell it is, the superhighway. Now that's real. We read from construction magazines online and such. Robert Burke sent that stuff out, where they admitted, was it Grupo Ferrovial, that was from Spain, got a contract to do this, and it was to obviously build a highway along I-35. Now, of course, the NASCO corridor people will say, and I haven't been there in a long time because I really don't care anymore, that, oh no, it's on a new highway. But, so there's lies all over the place where you have this construction group saying, yeah, we got the contract to build a new one. Well, where is it? Okay? I'm not doubting it's going to be there. But the point is, what's the point? All right, we know where this whole thing is going. How can a country get stupid about protecting its borders in its almost 200th and let's say 210th anniversary? How can that happen? It's got to be allowed to happen. And why in the world will we allow all these immigrants to come in? And I don't blame them for trying to get here for obvious reasons. But why in the world do we forget how to protect our borders at a time when we're losing jobs left and right? You cannot have these diametrically opposed equations continuing without having problems. But that's the point, to have problems. So, the handwriting's on the wall. If you choose not to read it, or if you choose to read it and not do anything about it, that's up to you. But don't ever complain or whine or bitch or moan about how you didn't know. Because most of you who listen to Paytridiot Radio will listen to it to the day your door gets banged down, and you'll claim you had no idea this was happening. Because basically, you're lazy, and you want somebody else to do something. And that's always the case, all right? And I've had enough of that shit. I really don't care anymore. I haven't cared for a long, long time. You want to do something, indemnify yourself and your family. You can do something about your finances as best you can, and also your health. All right, that's the best you can do. Other than that, you can vote all you want. It won't matter because this is going to go down the tubes. But I want to read something in the end because I think this is really important. This is where I think it's at. I don't know if you saw this at all, but at the end of last month, somebody died by the name of David Nichols, Dr. David Nichols. He was called Tangier Island's Angel. And let me read this. Dr. David Nichols, the award-winning physician from Virginia's Northern Neck, who inspired many by selflessly providing health care for the residents of Tangier Island in the Chesapeake Bay, died today. Whitestone Family Practice, the thriving practice Nichols built in the Lancaster County community of Whitestone, confirmed that Nichols, 62, died this morning at his home, surrounded by his family, after battling cancer. His death came less than 4 months after myriad dignitaries flew to Tangier to join the island's 525 residents for the dedication of a $1.4 million state-of-the-art health center that replaced a cramped, dilapidated clinic that had served the island for more than 50 years. The new facility was christened the David B. Nichols Health Center in honor of the gentle, bespectacled physician who made a habit of flying from Whitestone to the island on his day off. Jimmy Carter, the Northern Neck developer and friend and patient of Nichols, who spearheaded the public-private partnership that built the center and established a foundation that will help ensure high-quality health care for islanders for years to come, said in an email today that Nichols passed away at about 6:30 a.m. Carter said Nichols' widow, Diane, quote, said that it was fitting for David to leave us early on a Thursday because that is when he always left for Tangier, end of quote. So firm was Nichols' commitment to helping the people of Tangier that he had a helipad built behind the Whitestone family practice and earned his pilot's license to make it easier for him to fly out to the island. The people he served for 31 years tried to pay him back by turning out en masse at the August 29 dedication of the Tangier Clinic, a ceremony that also included Governor Bob McDonald and Representative Robert J. Whitman, who represents the island in Washington and does a shitty job. I'm sorry, I said that. Representatives of Staff Care, the organization that chose Nichols as, quote, Country Doctor of the Year, unquote, in 2006, came from Texas to present Nichols with his first Country Doctor of the Decade award. An emotional Nichols told the crowd he planned to have his ashes buried beside the clinic. Quote, while I leave you in body, Nichols told the gathering, his eyes red and his voice catching, I will never leave you in spirit. Well, he never did. That's what it's about. Okay? You want to kick the NWO in the shins? You want to do something about that? Do something to alleviate suffering. That'll work. For those of you who don't believe in a Jesus, have a nice day. Because you're not going to beat the NWO. And you can want to, and you can think about it, and you can fake it, but you're not going to. For those of you who are Christians, I'm sorry to say, if you think you're going to beat anything back, you're not. That doesn't mean necessarily that I or anyone else feel that we want to hasten this whole thing along. Not at all. But what must be, will be. And unfortunately, don't feel sorry for ourselves because there are so many people that have been born in such nasty, ugly, and just holocaustic epochs that we're no different. So, it's not like God just chose us to give us a bad day. And there's other things to do. Jesus didn't say, hey, listen, after I go, why don't you guys run for government? Why don't you go out and kill as many Muslims as you can? Why don't you become bankers and lawyers? All right? Did he say that? No. But you know what? Listen, I'm a bad example of Christianity, and anybody who wants to say I'm a hypocrite, you're right. But I don't call wrong right, and I don't call right wrong. I also know that when I go before Christ, okay, all I know is that I understand the way the deal was. And I understand that He's Lord. Any of you who want to go ahead and question the Bible and everything else, hey, good luck. Because that's one thing I know I don't have to go ahead and worry about when I go into judgment. And we're all going into judgment. If you want to waste your time trying to change government and all this other crap or indemnify yourself from the IRS code, go ahead and do it. You're wasting your time, and it could be better spent. All that Christ ever told anybody was, feed my sheep. You have the poor, you got the infirm, comfort them. And in that way, the least you do unto them, you do unto me. So if you have deep, disturbing doubts about your religion, I really feel badly for you. If you think you can go out and stop that which must happen, that's great. For those of you who don't believe in a God, and of course everybody does, but of course also we have atheists and agnostics who claim they either don't believe it or don't know. Baloney. You all know. That's the reason why you rail against it all the time. If you think you can beat back the secular NWO, all I'm asking for not only is a game plan, but when he's going to start to implement it. Otherwise, man, I mean, you're just breathing my air and wasting my time. Heard it all before, man. See you later. Okay, fine. What anybody was in their time, they would have been in your time, given the same exposure to the same influences, both negative and positive. So enough said about that. But I'm just saying at this point, I'm looking around, and some of the things I see take place, I think I've gotten past the being upset. I am now starting to laugh because the whole thing becomes such a flustercock. You know, it really does, and it's never going to change. And I understand that too. All right, so here we are. I'm getting emails from people. It's nice they want to, like, for instance, we'll take this thing that happened with the Arizona shooter. And it's nice that they say, well, what do you think? But I have to tell you where I'm at right now. Now, understand, I was in the Paytridiot thing for solidly from, late 2001. I started probably at the beginning of that year. Started the show with Harry in June and July, I forget, of 2002. And I was, a steadfast listener, and, I bought my Berkey, and I bought my Miracle 2 neutralizer gel and all this stuff. And I'm not sorry I did, But, I mean, there was nobody that was more devoted. I should have had like a little Mickey Mouse hat ears and a little pin that said, ooh, you really are a dedicated Paytridiot listener. And then I found out, once I got inside the beast, just how bullshit they are, too. Every bit as much as mainstream. But that's for later. People ask me what I think about the Arizona shooter. I don't know. And I don't feel the need to try to figure it out or guess it. And I'll tell you why. Let me ask you this. You remember the Nickel Mines shooting in 06? And the Bailey, Colorado school shooting in 06? You remember the Omaha shopping mall shooting in 07? How about the Northern Illinois shooter? Of course, you more or less remember the Virginia Tech shooter. That gets brought up every so often. Well, welcome to the first Stuff and Things of 2011. Yeah, I've subtitled this Confessions of a Recovered Paytridiot. And there's, maybe I'll throw in the second subtitle because I haven't written the stuff out yet. And that would be, how much time do you have to waste? Like the song from Bonnie Raitt, Afraid to Run Out of Time, when she says, life gets awful precious when there's less of it to waste. Beautiful. I remember also a little placard that was in one of my friends' his kitchen, I remember going there and about when I was 13, and a little placard said, we get too old too fast, too smart too late. That's true too. So I'm at an advantage from most of you. And I understand also why older people get grumpy. And that's because they've seen the same shit generationally, like what, maybe 4, 5, 6 times around. And I mean, I was part of the young and dumb too. I understand that. Some listen more than others. I think I did to a certain extent, not as much as I should have, but certainly more than others had. Because they understand where it's at. And there are, it's funny because when I was young, I looked at some guys that used to be pro ball players. And I sized myself up looking at them. And here they are like, 70 years old or something. I'm like, yeah, dude, you ain't anything. And I'm like, wait a second. How do you know what they were like in their own cohort, in their own time? They don't look at anything now because, what does Willie Mays look like now? What does Mickey Mantle look like now? He's dead. And then you start to realize you can't look at it that way. You got to look at everyone in their time. And that's when I started to like listen a little bit more, because I realized that there were some guys who were dudes in their time. And if they were in your cohort or you were in theirs, they'd kick your ass. You know? I mean, who can't slap around a 70-year-old or a 75-year-old? That's not the point. So then I got a lesson in to sort through all this stuff. So I don't know. What was interesting about this situation was this is the first time that they actually had an accomplice thought of being involved with this guy. Then all of a sudden it was, oh, no, that didn't happen. Yeah, I find it interesting because most other times there is some kind of question as to how one person could have done all the shooting, and then they don't want to hear about accomplices. And this happened with the Omaha shooting, where some person, and I don't want to get into all this, because, you can check this out for yourself. But anyway, what happened was, while this story was running, as it was unfolding, one account had a gentleman in camos hiding under a bench in a bus kiosk, and he was arrested. But the situation kept going. So what was that all about? Was it a second shooter? Some people apparently had different descriptions. Didn't sound like the same guy. The weapons were different also. A Kalashnikov, one said it was being used. Another said no, it was like an AK or an AR or whatever. Difference being is that you have to hand load a Kalashnikov, which takes time, whereas you can pop out the clips on the other one. All right, that's just an example of what goes on. And one of the interesting things happened also. I had done a series of Columbine and Port Arthur in Australia and Dunblane in Scotland. These shootings. Dunblane was the earliest in 96. Columbine was in 99, as I just said before. And Port Arthur was 03, I believe. And they all smell. What was really dynamic was at the time I was doing this, the author of a book, Dunblane Massacre, was now starting to put together what she had not put together before about what was not right about that shooting as well. Different caliber bullets, I believe they found. How did this guy shoot himself with one gun when apparently what he was killed by wasn't that caliber? And it all came together. It was really interesting to listen to that awakening in light of everything else. And then that whole shooting made more sense. I don't know, gun control at the end of it, I guess. So, but what my point is that how does that change things? What does it mean to you? And I'm not saying you shouldn't have any kind of feelings about McIntyre's brought out there to say, well, what I really meant was, and blah, 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 and fine. Now, McIntyre's not with CNN anymore. How does it feel, asshole? Yeah, they only eat their young. So that's the way it goes. So it's easier now to do a cover-up because after the original incident happens, how many people actually captured the very first accounts? After that, there's a closing of ranks, and there is a damage control thing, and then 24/7 broadcast media and newspapers and everything else just bang you consistently with the way you should think about it. I mean, one of the greatest things about that recording that Jim Kosher did with Tuesday Morning in September is that he doesn't really have the radio or TV on when he's filming the towers being impacted and what happens after that, because he's out on a fire escape in an apartment building in Jersey City, and he's watching it and giving it a running monologue. And he's saying, there's bombs there. I mean, because that's what it looks like, and rightly so to everyone. But then what happens is the media comes on and tells you what you saw. What am I going to tell you? And it works. All right. Now, hey, listen. Was the Arizona shooter mind control? I don't know. And I don't feel the necessity, as I'm sure some of you or all of you have heard on these Paytridiot shows, where the hosts come out real quick and start popping off, and they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But they have to do it to keep you listening. They don't know. They can guess just like I can guess. Now, the problem also with something like the Arizona shooting is because what happens is, legitimately, news agencies go down there and they start interviewing anything that's got a pulse. They'll talk to anybody. I mean, when this first happened, as it broke, I was sitting here doing something, listening to, on the internet, WCBS 880 AM out of New York. They had her dead. So, and then I came back on, well, maybe, and well, man, she's dead. Nobody knows. And it goes back and forth because there's no spokesperson as yet set up. It's just a complete chaotic situation where news people go down there, stick a mic in front of anybody, and it's like, tell us what happened. And then you get them. Remember Columbine in 99 and the real story behind that? What about the Dunblane massacre in Scotland in 96? You remember that? How about Port Arthur in 03? You remember that? No, you don't. Or at least you have forgotten about it. And that's my point. Here's where I'm going with this, okay? And also this comes under the heading of you can't have it both ways. People still think that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter. What am I going to tell you? They had a commission that came out in 77 and said there is a conspiracy. Under Gerald Ford, I guess that was. There is a conspiracy. And then the question was, okay, then nothing. And that's the way it goes. It just disappears. Nobody pursues it. And if anybody tries to pursue it who's JQ public, you're going to get crushed. And I don't mean you're going to be threatened or anything like that. You're just not going to get through. Because that's the way the thing is built. If any of you listen to Lusitanian, especially the last three, you understand the anatomy of a cover-up. Well, it was easier then. Well, I'm not so sure. Because now, even in the advent of TV and all the first accounts that were broadcasted, and this goes also for the Murrow building bombing, they all disappeared. Some people have saved it, I've saved some stuff, but it's all disappeared. Nobody remembers the contradictions, what everyone's first impression was of what happened at the trade towers, that is bombs, what happened at the Pentagon, and that was bombs, and Shanksville is a complete mess. But even though that those first accounts go out, they never show again. Anybody who's got their VCR running had captured them, and that was good. Other than that, you'll never see those things again. And there's a reason for that as well. You remember what I was saying to you before, and we did this thing on Jamie McIntyre, and his take about, well, there's no sign of a plane at this building. And, then they bring back on CNN to do the damage control. And, of course, they don't play the whole tape of all the things that McIntyre said. And then